Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Dota Underlords has just released a huge update that is sure to shake up the meta, and they adjusted a lot of units and their abilities, and some items, and all kinds of stuff, so let's get right into it. So first off, this is a very big bug fix. They fixed a long-standing issue where passive abilities, excepting the Dragon special abilities and Sand Kings, were using stats from one rank higher, so specifically Crystal Maiden, Drow Ranger, Slark, Phantom Assassin, Anti-Mage, anybody who said passive on them was using the wrong ability. They were basically too strong. So this made all those units I listed actually stronger than they should have been. And this has been in the game since release, and the developers have known about it, and they said, yes, we know this is wrong, but they hadn't fixed it until now. And so this led a lot of people to believe that this was maybe the intended behavior, and maybe they were happy with the power level of those units, which was, for most of the history of the game, was kind of fine. But recently we'd kind of seen those units take over the meta. Some of the assassins, specifically Slark and Phantom Assassin, were really rising through the ranks in the meta, and Crystal Maiden was now enabling a lot of mage compositions to really dominate at the top levels. And so they finally decided to fix that, and they said that some units got buffed, which really was not any of them, other than Drow Ranger, and they'll be monitoring the others. So definitely look to see mages take a big hit. They should still probably be a reasonable meta composition, but maybe not S tier. Maybe they'll just be a middle of the pack A tier kind of composition. And assassins, who were already kind of middle of the pack, maybe a little bit better than average, are definitely going to take a big hit from this, because 2-star Slark and Phantom Assassin essentially got a huge nerf. So what else did they change? A few bots were reprogrammed a little bit, some new animations, cool stuff. Fixed an issue where tiny quantities of damage, mainly from Warlock and his Shadow Word, would generate too much or too little mana. So that's good to see that just uniformly handled. And so this is a very big one. With most summons removed, as I said, they changed a lot of abilities. They have removed the Summoning Stone item, which is... I'm personally very disappointed, because I loved Summoning Stone. It was my favorite item. It was the strongest item in the game, but seeing it removed is a little bit disappointing. I agree that it was a little bit too strong. It was pretty much an auto pick at every point in the game, and if you got one of them, you basically had a couple different compositions that you'd use to take advantage of it. I'm still a little sad to see it go, because I liked those kind of strategies. Personally, I enjoyed playing them. I just loved seeing the army of little summoned units just going crazy, but I understand that that was probably not the healthiest of gameplay metas, so I understand why they did it. But we'll get to some of those changes here in a moment. So on the hero changes side, they have buffed Axe. Axe will now have armor scaling from 5, 10, 15 at 1, 2, and 3 star, and his base health has been increased by about 100 at level 1, and then of course that becomes 200 and 400 at level 2 and 3. They added an extra 5 for some reason. It's 805 instead of just 800. Not sure why they thought that was an appropriate change, but whatever. He got a decent buff, which was fine, because he was pretty much not played outside of the early game. I still don't know if he's really going to be played. I mean, he's quite a bit tankier now, but he still does basically no damage. And if I'm looking for a tank, I'd probably want Pudge for his very useful hook, as well as his Heartless bonus. Disruptor fixed an issue where total damage could be wrong. I don't know if that was positive or negative, but they did nerf him slightly, where it no longer gives units in the storm a miss chance. And that was kind of something that was tacked on at one point whenever Disruptor was a little bit too weak. They said, okay, well, we're going to give them this ability to make attacks miss, and then he became highly in the meta, and just everybody always wanted to play Disruptor, and they finally determined he's a little bit too strong, and they decided to take that away. He should still be fine. You're still going to want him to complete the Brawny Alliance. You're still going to want him for the Warlock bonus, the Ace effect, so I don't think you change whenever you want Disruptor. He's just going to be a little bit weaker when you do use him. Dragon Knight fixed Corrosive Breath not working. It incorrectly had a duration of 0, so I assume this is a buff where the a small damage over time effect just wouldn't actually apply, so this should increase his damage output. Drow Ranger. Attack rate increased from 0.769 to 0.833, so that's a slight attack speed increase. and the minimum and maximum damage on her attacks was also increased by about 10. So this is kind of a buff to offset the nerf, where her precision aura used to use 1 rank higher. So if you had a 2-star Drow Ranger, you were actually getting the rank 3 Drow Ranger aura. And since that's removed, she's now getting a little bit more power on her own right. That probably results in a net nerf, though. Drow Ranger her main problem is that has very low health. She only has 400 at 1 star, 800 and 1600 at 2 and 3 star. And that is just not a lot compared to a lot of other units in the game. Oftentimes against an opponent who has a reasonable number of AoE effects, she'll just be killed off before, without anybody even attacking her directly. She'll just die to the AoE effects. And this doesn't really help that matter. She's still not going to put out as much damage as somebody like a Wind Ranger or a Sniper, who have much, much higher damage per second. So overall, this is still a nerf, but you still probably want to play Drow Ranger because she has the Heartless bonus, which is very useful for Hunter builds. Next up, Lycan. Lycan, his attack damage was pretty substantially increased by about 15 at 1 star, and then about 30 at 2 star, and so on. But his ability has been changed. Instead of summoning wolves, he just gets the shapeshift effect. No wolves will be summoned, but his max HP gain will be higher. He'll gain 40, 50, 60% HP rather than 30, 40, 50. And the crit chance has been increased. So he's much bigger of a carry on his own right, and much less focused on the summons or stacking the Savage Bleed from the wolves. I don't know if this is a net nerf or buff. I think the general consensus is it's probably going to be a nerf, because one of Lycan's big power points in the early game, at the very least, was his ability to have 3 Savages to be stacking that Savage Bleed. And now that won't be the case, but he himself will be quite a bit more powerful. So you might see him a little bit more viable in the late game to carry some big items where he can get these much bigger crits, and he'll have much higher health total as well. Next change, Nature's Prophet, and this one is huge. So Nature's Prophet has got a very slight attack speed increase. His maximum mana, so the mana required to cast a spell, has gone up to 100, and his attack damage has been moderately increased by about 10. They have changed his ability. It is no longer summoning a treant, in line with what we mentioned before, with most of the summons being removed from the game. And they've added Wrath of Nature. And it says Nature's Prophet zaps a target for 250, 275/300 damage. This bounces 3, 4, or 5 times across the enemy board, increasing damage by 10%, 13%, 15% per bounce. That's huge. I don't know if you really understand how big these numbers are. The effect by itself is kind of like a Chain Frost type effect, right? It just bounces between people, deals some damage. But instead of slowing, it gets a little bit stronger. So mechanically, it's very similar to Chain Frost. But the numbers are huge. 250 times 3 at 1 star is 750 damage, and then you add in the bonus 10% per bounce, and you're looking at in the realm of 800-ish magical damage from a rank 1 Nature's Prophet alt, and it only gets bigger and bigger from there. And that is really massive. That is, so for reference, Lena at 2 star does 750 magic damage up to a single target with her ability. And I know Lena's not a very good unit, but 1 star Nature's Prophet deals more than that at 1 star and does much, much, much more than that at 2 star. And it's all magical damage. It's on the same kind of 100 mana, a reasonable length cooldown. It's fairly long, but it's big. I think we should start to see Nature's Prophet being played a lot more, certainly outside of like summon builds, and you may even see him try to be splashed into mages, because like I said, this is magical damage and it gets real big real fast. Don't forget he's a druid, which means he's fairly easy to get to a higher star level if you just have a pair of 2-star druids. Like if you have a 2-star Nature's Prophet and a 2-star Enchantress in the early game, and you just randomly like high roll to a Nature's Prophet 3-star, he casts once and that's gonna like wipe the enemy team. It's gonna deal like 400-ish damage to their whole team, all magic damage. That's absolutely insane. These numbers are very high. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how Nature's Prophet plays now. You're definitely going to see him a lot more often, and like I said, maybe even splashed into mages compositions. Who knows? Shadow Shaman. Shadow Shaman attack rate has been increased from 0.625 to 0.8. Still probably the worst unit in the game. His ability is fairly low impact. His damage output is still pretty low, even with this buff. His alliances aren't very relevant in the early game, so still going to pass on him, but it's good to see they give him a little bit of love. Tusk. Maximum mana has been changed from 100 down to 60, and Walrus Punch, the mana cost, has been changed as well, and the cooldown has been changed from 7 to 4 seconds. It's a pretty big buff. We saw what happened whenever Puck had its mana reduced from 100 to 60. Puck went from like a forgettable mage that you tried not to include to like one of the best auto-include mages. And now with Tusk, you would probably start seeing him a lot more common, especially because he can start punching very, very quickly. Remember, he is immune when he's punching. That was added last patch. And now he's going to be punching a lot more often. And yeah, I'm excited to try out Tusk a little bit more often, because previously he was just y'all going to play him in the early game with some other savages, and then you try to get rid of him as soon as it makes sense to. But now that savages on the whole seem to be being nerfed, this kind of carves out a new niche for Tusk in that maybe he can actually be like a physical damage carry in like 6 warrior compositions. He can kind of deal quite a bit of damage with this new Walrus Punch. Maybe him plus Doom and Slarter are going to be like the higher damage dealing warriors that you might want to try to play into the late game, especially at 3-star. And the last change here to Venomancer, in keeping with the theme of removing summons, at the very least the low or the early game summons. Venomancer's Plague Ward ability has been removed, and he now gets Venomous Gale. And Venomous Gale will launch a ball of venom in a line, poisoning enemy units so that they take 25, 50, 100 damage, as well as 10, 20, and 40 damage every 3 seconds for 15 seconds. Affected units lose 15% movement speed and 25% attack speed. Mana cost is still 100, and the cooldown is 10, 8, and 6. So this is... it's definitely a nerf, because Venomancer was he was probably the best early game unit. And so seeing his Plague Wards removed is going to be definitely problematic. The numbers on this seem very low, right? We're looking at 25 damage, so at 1-star, 25 damage plus 10 damage every 3 seconds. So even if it goes to the full duration, that's 5 ticks. So that's a total of 75 damage to everybody, but 75 damage to everyone. Let's compare that to Nature's Prophet, where he deals 250 times 3. That's 750 at least. And you can start to see why I think these numbers are very low. It does have a movement speed decrease, which is a little bit more relevant than I think people give it credit for. If somebody needs to move, they're going to take like an extra second or two to get somewhere, which means they're going to take an extra auto attack from whoever they're walking towards. And slows their attack speed, which is definitely not irrelevant. And it slows it for a long time. So if you know the troll buff, the troll alliance buff, if you have all 4 trolls, your entire team gets plus 30 attack speed. And that feels like a pretty big increase, right? It feels like, oh man, I'm a lot stronger now. This is going to reduce their attack speed by 25%, which is close to 30. So that's going to really feel like a substantial attack speed slow. So this is not going to be all about the damage. This is going to be about the utility and trying to win the long fights. Slow the attack speed, slow their movement speed, let the poison tick out and bleed them dry. Which, I kind of like the flavor, but I'm also really going to miss Plague Ward because I really thought that was a very iconic ability for Venomancer. So, that's it on this update. It's going to be a big one. It definitely adjusts the meta a lot. So we're obviously not going to be seeing as many savages in the early game because they lost a lot of their power in summoning the extra savages. We're going to see a little bit weaker mages and assassins because of the passive adjustment. But we didn't really see too many adjustments to things like warriors and warlocks, which I think should still be quite strong, even if they can't really splash the summoning stones. You should still see knights be pretty strong, because knights were kind of a little bit below average in this last patch, but since they weren't touched and everything else was adjusted, you should see those move up. And maybe even hunters start to move up a little bit. They do suffer a little bit from the lack of Drow Ranger's precision aura, but overall I don't think that's going to be a massive loss. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I cannot wait to get in and start playing around with these changes. They look great. And I'm excited that the developers have addressed some of the issues with the passive bugs as well as the slightly overpowered summoning stone. Although I would like them not to completely remove it, but I understand why they did. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.